I'm not an organizer and I'm not a politician, but maybe I can spur people who are organizers and politicians to act. Maybe I can get people who are neither of those things to still want to act.
Welcome, friends. I'm Kristen Martin, and this is Torches. Today we have my dear friend and long-term collaborator, Kamala Sankaram. Kamala is a composer and performer who moves freely between the worlds of experimental music, sound installation, and contemporary opera. I'm really excited to speak with her today. Welcome, Kamala.
Thank you.
So, how'd you come to be in downtown performance?
Oh gosh. I think it was probably the trajectory of not having a trajectory of not really knowing what it would mean to come to New York City and to try and find my way into being an artist. I grew up in a small town in California, about an hour inland from San Diego. We were where you stopped to get gas on the way somewhere else. So, people from my town didn't really come to New York. I didn't know anything about experimental theater or music. I thought I was going to come to New York and be Sondheim, like not be in Sondheim, but be Sondheim. But then I went to Sarah Lawrence, and that also was kind of an accident in some ways, in that they sent me a postcard that said, "You are different, so are we." And I was like, "Yes, I am. I will go to Sarah Lawrence, and I will come to New York City." And when I got to Sarah Lawrence, a lot of my music professors were in the Philip Glass Ensemble. And so that's how I started to be introduced to these pieces that were a little less Sondheim-y. And I found that I really, really liked them. So my I think it was freshman or sophomore year, one of my survey classes, the teacher was the pianist in the Glass Ensemble. My sophomore year choral director had just come off of touring with Meredith Monk's piece Atlas, so we learned all of that music. So I was just sort of being surrounded by these things that were pushing at my idea of what music and theater and opera were, and I found myself wanting to continue that. And the other thing that happened while I was at Sarah Lawrence is I had a friend who was in a show at Here Arts Center. So we all went to see it, and it was some vampire show. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was...
Was it Vampire Cowboys?
No, they were vampires, but they were... It was like... Yeah, I can't even remember what the show was now, but it was the strangest and coolest thing I had seen. And so that was the other thing. I think it was just coming to New York and seeing what else we could do, and that led to me wanting to continue doing that. That was a very long answer.
Love it.
Yeah.
So, experimentation is always a really big part of what you do, and you generally don't repeat yourself. Mm-hmm. You're always trying new things that you haven't tried in the last thing that you did. Why do you keep pushing the envelope that way? What interests you about that as a maker?
I think I've always just been kind of curious. So the curiosity about the world and about different ways of engaging with the world is what leads me to make a new thing in the first place. So I've never really wanted to repeat things because I always have new questions, and I always wonder if I could have done the last thing that I did better or in a more interesting way. But then also I've always been interested in technology, and the technologies are always changing as well. So then, when you encounter that new way of engaging or that new thing that might have an impact on the culture at large, you or I want to be part of that conversation also. I have ideas and questions about it, and I want to see what it can do.
Could you give an example of a project like that?
Well, I think, when we did All Decisions Will Be Made by Consensus, which was our Zoom opera.
It traumatized me. It was on the WPIX Channel 11 after school movie.
And it was maybe a couple of weeks into the pandemic when I had used Zoom because of Joe Holt. Joe Holt was our collaborator on Looking at You, and he had invited me to come and give a talk to some of the people at band camp over Zoom, and it was my first time using it. So I had been familiar with Zoom before, but then when we were all kind of cut off from each other, it seemed like we were going to be in that situation for a long time. And so we should start figuring out how we could keep working and keep making things. And
So we got to make the first Zoom opera
so we
together.
made the first Zoom opera together, which may live in infamy. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But that was a case where I feel like we all collaborated well together because we were experimenting with the technology and seeing what it could actually do, and then using that to inform how we made the piece rather than just trying to make what we would always make.
Guys, can you hear me? You're all frozen. Guys, can you hear me? You're all frozen.
And I think that that's one of the reasons why I haven't really done the same thing is I feel like the performance practice needs to mirror what the medium is. It can't just be an older way of doing something slapped onto the new thing because it doesn't always work.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It's risky, though. It's risky doing different things every time. Risk sometimes leads to failure.
Yes.
Has that happened, and what do you learn from when it happens?
It has happened. It has happened not so much in the context of technology, but in the context of pushing the performance practice. I think because you're trying something new, maybe you haven't really or clearly figured out how to communicate what it is that you want, and so it doesn't work. Like the example I can think of that is I was doing an opera for a big company, and I actually tried to take some of the notation that I developed while we were working on All Decisions and on Only You, and to put it into the context of this big...
Only You was another Zoom opera
yes.
we did during the pandemic, but it was a multi-episode one. We did an episode every week live, and then we built it over 8 weeks or 9 weeks.
8 weeks. 8 weeks.
So we ended up with an 80-minute opera at the end.
Yeah.
Phantasmagoria is a sequence of real or imagined images caused by encephalic recalibrating.
And one of the things that I was trying out during those remote telematic pieces is how do you make something where people can still play together even if they don't have a shared sense of pulse or of rhythm. And what the interesting side effect there is that I saw the singers acting like actors in a way that I haven't always seen in opera, because what you're basically doing when you write an opera as a composer is you're giving your performers a line reading. Like you're not letting them explore their own dramatic impulses. And so because there was no pulse, because I hadn't given them any rhythms, they were doing things that I might not have expected them to do, which was great. So that's why I decided, well, even though we're not on Zoom, I could still do that. I could still try it. And it totally failed. And it was because I wasn't thinking about, the orchestra and the norms around the orchestra and how you work with them as performers as opposed to the singers as performers. So, But I learned from it. And so I'm still chugging ahead and trying to do that in the pieces that I'm writing now, but with a better understanding of how that's going to impact the other people in the situation rather than just thinking of the singer and actor perspective.
Yeah, but what about, I know you've done a lot of work of Anthony Braxton stuff as a performer.
Yes.
Because I know that there's much that's set, but there's also a bunch of improvisation in there. So is there stuff that you can learn from the way that he works that can inform the more traditional opera context, or do you think it's not working the same way?
I have taken inspiration from some of Anthony's work, and especially he uses something called diamond clef, which is open clef, so that if you're an instrumentalist, you can choose how you're reading the notes on the page. And for a singer, it's also very freeing because you're not worried about the pitches being totally correct. So I've done that in a few of my pieces. I think the interesting thing about working with Anthony Braxton is that you do have to be an improviser in order to realize those scores. And so there's this fine line when working with classical musicians where a lot of them don't really feel comfortable improvising. So one of the things that I've done is try to put places where the improvisation can happen but doesn't have to. And that's something else that Anthony does is there are jumping off points in the score that indicate the kind of improvisation you can do at that moment if you want to, but you also don't have to.
You work, and as just as we're saying, you work as a singer, you work as a composer, you write sometimes. So how do people try to categorize you and put you in a box, and what do you do with that?
It was actually quite a problem early on. And I think to some extent it still is. It depends on the context that I'm working in. But when I started to focus on composition, a lot of the composers that I had worked with previously stopped calling me to do their work anymore because it was you can be one or the other. You can't be both. And I feel like that's loosened up to a degree in the last several years. At least I don't see the same stigma about performers who begin writing music and then continue as performers at the same time. I think it's an extra challenge for singers because there is this idea that singers are kind of lesser musicians than instrumentalists are, even though that's not true, especially if you're doing new music. But I think that that's part of why it was hard to sort of assimilate the idea that I could be both things. But what's been interesting in the last couple of years is that people have been asking me to sing things again, whereas for a while that they were totally separate things.
I was thinking before when you talked about Atlas that it kind of went full circle because you got to perform that piece with, was it with LA Opera?
It was with the LA Philharmonic.
LA Philharmonic. So how was that to come back to that material 20 years later?
Yeah, it was fantastic, because it's such a great piece. I still love that piece intensely. And so then to really be inside of it and to really get to inhabit it, I felt really, really lucky to be a part of that.
I also, in your work, I think always of empathy because it's so central to the way that you approach why we're making something. And having done, I don't know, we've done 5 or 6 projects together, it's always something that we talk about. Can you talk about why that's important to you and what you're trying to craft in your work?
Yeah, I think that I've always been interested in how to create some kind of change in the world around me. And, being somebody who is mixed race, whose father is an immigrant, who comes from, originally grew up in a community of immigrants, I saw this very clear divide between sort of my day-to-day experience in that community, but then where was the representation of it in the larger culture? And I feel like that led to a lot of misunderstanding. When my parents split up and my mom moved me to this small town near San Diego, I had a kid come and she lifted up my bangs and she was like, "Where's the dot? Where's the dot?" And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" She's like, "Don't you have a dot tattooed on your head?" And I was like, this other girl had spread this rumor that because my family was Indian, I would have a tattoo of a dot on my head. And it was just like, it was like, I feel like where we've gotten to now is there is much more of an awareness of other cultures. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with storytelling. I think of this example all the time when I was a kid, which I'm going to date myself here, but there was a movie called Short Circuit. And that movie, there was one of the characters, a main character in it was Indian. I don't remember what his name in the movie was, but I was so excited as a kid because you never saw Indian people. And then I found out later it was a white guy in brown face. It was a white actor with brown makeup on. It wasn't an Indian person at all. And it's just, you see that over and over and you start to think, well, how can I contribute to a storytelling that will actually open up the human experience in a larger way, a more universal way? So I think that's why empathy has been important, is because I had these experiences when I was young and I wanted to see myself and I didn't.
And does your own identity inform the way you make work?
I think it always does. And I think that a lot of it does have to it comes back to being a mixed race person, and that I am always balancing these two cultures that I come from. And that I don't really feel like I can represent one or the other because I'm both equally. And so that has led to making things that look for commonalities between different genres or different forms or different disciplines.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of your work also is looking at social ills and things that are going terribly wrong in our society. Why did you choose art as your mode of expression rather than politics or activism or social organizing? Yeah.
I think I didn't know. Well, I think there was a combination of things. When I was young, I was much more of an activist. Like when the Republican National Convention happened in San Diego when I was in high school, I was working for CalPERG and they sent me there. I was the one protester outside of the Republican National Convention. And I got tired of seeing things not change. And so it felt like the empathy part of it, in order to create real change, more people have to be invested. Like, it can't just be me. And I think that's what really great organizers do, is they get other people in the community involved. And I didn't know how to do that. I think I knew how to tell stories, I think, and I knew what made me feel emotional, and that I could share that with others. And so I think that's why I gravitated more towards art than to continue, trying to be active in these movements that I had been in.
You also are a doctor.
Yeah.
You got a PhD, and I'm going to get wrong. I know it has to do with our minds and behavioral therapy,
it's cognitive psychology.
Cognitive psychology,
psycholinguistics.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how did that relate to all of the other things that you're doing? How did that come to be a part of your making?
Well, I think that the intellectual life has always been important as well, which is, it's related to curiosity. Like, I don't know any artists who aren't also avid readers and avid thinkers. I think it's just, they come together. The thing that pushed me into actually getting a doctorate was, my Indian parent who was like, you can't be a musician. You need something practical. Not that a degree in cognitive psychology is practical either, but at least... you could do research with it. A lot of the people in my lab went on to work for Dragonsoft, which made Siri, so I think they're probably doing fine.
And you've also made a lot of work in response to the climate crisis.
Yes.
Why? And I'm loving your leaf tattoo
Yes.
there in celebration of the earth that we inhabit.
Yes.
So why is that work important to you right now? And share maybe something about one of the pieces you did recently, or one that might be coming up that I don't know about.
My work on climate and environmentalism is actually the longest thread of activism that I have had, even from when I was in elementary school. Like, I belonged to the World Wildlife Fund, and I was a very strict vegetarian for a very long time. But I think it came from reading Diet for a New Planet and like all of those books that came out in the early 90s, again, dating myself. But I think it is the quintessential crisis of our time. It's the thing that's going to touch everyone, regardless of your wealth or your geography or whatever else it might be. We cannot escape it as much as we might think we can. Like, even if the person who's building a penis rocket to take him to Mars, like, you're not getting away from it. You're still going to have to deal with the fact that there's nobody left on Earth to help you while you're on Mars, right? And so I think that everything else also ties back into climate. Like a lot of the issues with immigration that we have right now is because people can't farm their land anymore because of drought. So if we look at what the root cause of many of the problems that we're facing is, it goes back to this change in climate and this thing that we've just been consistently ignoring for decades. And so it is the thing that I come back to because I think that it is the most pressing issue of our time in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so part of the work that I have been doing is how do you get people to wrap their heads around something that is longitudinal and hard to see? We are not good at long-term thinking, especially when we're talking the time scales that are involved here. And so a lot of the things that I've been making recently are how do we take that data and put it into something that's very visceral and easy to experience. So like I did a piece for Creative Time in 2021 that was an opera for the trees of Prospect Park about the life of a tree in the Black Rock Forest in Cornwall. And that was sort of 250 years of soundscape around the tree and how it changes.
And it was quite an epic piece. How many hours was it?
10 and a half hours,
Yes.
10 and a half hours long. Each 2 minutes of the piece are 1 year of the tree's life. So by the time we get to the end, we've projected into the future and the impacts of climate change. And so we have invasive insects and fires and storms.
And sirens at certain points.
And sirens, yeah. And what's interesting is that not everyone who visited it made it through the whole thing, but the people that did, they gave it a standing ovation at the end. Like it was a theater piece. I think because there's something about experiencing that time scale and that journey that puts you into sort of a different perspective. And I think that's what art does, is it can open a new perspective on seeing things that maybe then propels you to some kind of action. And I guess that's the hope, is I'm not an organizer and I'm not a politician, but maybe I can spur people who are organizers and politicians to act. Maybe I can get people who are neither of those things to still want to act. And I guess that's really the goal of making art for me, is how do you change somebody's worldview?
Yeah, I really saw that. I loved that piece in Prospect Park. And then I'm thinking also of the Creek piece in the Bronx.
Yeah.
With the audio experience where you're traveling the journey that this creek once had that is no longer there.
Yeah.
And the terrains that you cross because now it's a city. And that was really fascinating. And to think about the stamps that we've left behind that we don't acknowledge or we don't usually pay attention to.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to have that contemplative space and to think differently.
Yeah.
Institutions, how about that? How have institutions supported or not supported your work?
It's been an interesting mix. Like, I feel very lucky that I had a relationship with here for so long because I was allowed to fail again. Like, if you remember my residency, my harp residency, the first few tries at making that piece, Miranda, did not work. And so, it took a while to get it right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge for institutions, is how can you be this sort of foundational support for someone as they're figuring things out. There's a lot of risk aversion, particularly when you move up the ladder and there are institutions that have more money on the line for things. They don't want to take any risks. So what I've found is that I'm sort of working in these two tracks right now, that the riskier projects that I'm doing for the most part are not at large institutions. They're mostly in these smaller more funky spaces that are willing to go along with you for a journey that it might take a while to figure out how to make the thing work, but with the trust that it will eventually work, rather than pulling out at the first sign of maybe something needs to be revised or fixed or the technology isn't quite there yet.
Though we have a larger scale piece that we've been working on for a number of years now,
Yes.
which does have some institutional support And it's a pretty risky piece. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So Joan of this City is a piece that is inspired by Joan of Arc and takes the frame of Joan of Arc to look at homelessness in the United States, and particularly looking at unhoused women. And the entire script was written by women in Omaha at Micah House, and in Seattle at Mary's Place. And the risky part about this is that it's also an augmented reality piece, which allows it to be outside on the streets of the city and to allow the actor playing Joan and the audience to have this shared experience that people outside of the piece cannot participate in. And I think it's risky for several reasons. One is the technology, which is still very, very much on the edge of what it can actually do.
We've had to keep
Yes.
waiting to make the piece because the glasses haven't been able to do what we want it to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then also the subject matter, like the issue of homelessness is pretty polarizing. And I think part of the problem is the storytelling around it, right? That we don't seem to understand that most of us are one bad health scare away from losing our ability to pay our mortgage or our rent, right? And that the majority of the unhoused community are actually working. They have jobs. It's just not enough to afford an apartment, particularly in a place like New York City. So I think that was why it felt important to make this piece, to feature the voices of the women themselves, to put it outside on the street. But it's because of the polarizing issue and because of how opera in particular tends to get funded. It's been, I had a residency in Boulder a few years ago, and they were telling me that one of their donors actively didn't want to be involved because he said, well, that sounds very anti-capitalist. He's like, well, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting in building the coalition around the work that we've had more interest from the West Coast, where they have a larger issue with displacement, gentrification, and unhoused folks.
Yeah.
And so we've had a lot of folks that we're talking to and that we'll be doing the piece with in Opera Omaha and San Diego Opera, in conversation with Portland Opera and these other places where they're having a lot of these issues, in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And we will be bringing it to New York as well,
Yes.
at a place to be announced.
Yes.
So you were speaking about institutions. If there's one thing that you could change about the way that institutions operate, what would that be?
I think that one of the biggest issues we face in the United States in particular is the issue of funding and how that translates to trust and risk and all of these other things that we've been talking about. So where I think it's most successful is when a large institution that cannot take on risk partners with the smaller institution that can and gives them the support that they might not already have access to. Like, there are so many foundations that have a minimum level of budget that is necessary before you can even be considered for funding from them. And so many of the smaller theaters, particularly, in New York City, they just don't have access to those funds. Whereas
Right.
if a larger institution could take them on as sort of re-granting or however you want to think about it, I think it solves the problem for everybody, because then it's seeding the ecosystem in a way that the larger institution may be afraid of doing, but they don't have to take on the risk by themselves. They can partner with the smaller company. And I think that is a successful model. I'm not seeing it as much as I think
It needs
to happen.
Do you have other, more systemic recommendations about how to create a more sustainable life for artists in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hardest question, right? I think that the step one is getting rid of the stigma of day job, right? Like, I talk to so many young artists who, they don't think that they'll be successful unless they're supporting themselves full time making their art. I met a singer I was at this gala thing a few months ago, and she was like, don't tell anyone I'm here because I'm here for my day job. I'm not here as a performer. She didn't want anybody to know that she'd had to get a day job. So, I mean, I feel like we're putting this incredible burden on ourselves by saying you are not successful unless you are making all of your money by making your art, when it's so incredibly hard to do that. And it's a very small percentage of people that are able to do that without cobbling together many different things. So I think step one, just for mental health, is to say you are still an artist, even if you are working this other job. That's fine. I think that there should be more governmental support, for
Universal basic income.
Oh my gosh.
Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, look at Ireland. Like, they just had this successful program that they're
Yes.
now making permanent, which is basic income for artists. Because we are all making the environment, the cities that we live in, we are making those places the places that people want to come, and yet we are being priced out and we can't afford to stay ourselves. So I think there has to be a greater recognition of the universal good that comes from having a healthy arts ecosystem, and not one that's purely driven by profit motives either. I mean, if you look at, like, I've been thinking about this a lot because of, I don't know if you read Liz Pelly's book, Mood Machine. So I think it came out in March, that she's talking specifically about Spotify. And this is meticulously researched, decade-long look at Spotify's practices, how they've changed over time, and how they are impacting the overall environment and ecosystem of musicians' funding and musicians' livelihoods. And what she shows is not only is Spotify, they've removed the royalty system for the most part, so you can't really be a middle class artist on CD sales like you might have been able to, but they've also created fake artists who are taking away from the revenue pool. And I think the most insidious thing...
Meaning AI generated music by fake artists, or what do you mean by
a
fake
mixture
artists?
of both. Some are like in particularly in long form genres like jazz and like ambient music. They have people who don't actually play those things making fake tracks to pad the playlist so that they don't
Wow.
it doesn't go to the artists that have been doing it for a very long time. But I think one of the other implications that we don't talk about as much is just how it's changed our own habits, like our inability to focus for more than 3 minutes and to look at long form experimental kinds of art. I was in a concert last week where there was this piece called Ursonate. That's a Kurt Schwitters piece from the 20s, I think. And it's like 40 minutes of these weird vocables, and it's this virtuosic solo vocalist doing the whole thing. And I couldn't help but think about, how would this do on Spotify? It would not do on Spotify. And so I feel like that's the other part of it, right? Is what our institutions are supporting and what we're being pushed toward changes our habits, changes our theater going habits, changes our listening habits as a whole. And so one of the things I would like to see institutions think about is, how do we encourage better holistic habits, right? How do we encourage people to be in community, in a theater, in a concert, in whatever it is, but together, paying attention for a longer amount of time? Like, I know it's a struggle. I even, like, I've been a Tony voter the past couple years. I go and I see how do people do in the musical. The musicals are like 2.5 hours long now. And, it's how do you sustain attention over a long period of time? And I think that that's something that we all as culture workers can think about, because our attention spans have gotten shorter.
It's a bad time in our country right now, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of shit happening. Mark Moody Joseph recently said, "How do we create conditions for artists to guide us forward to the other side of fear?" What do you think about that? Any ideas?
I think that it all ties back to a lot of these things that we've been talking about, right? Is how do we support the ecosystem of artists? How do we support the ecosystem of artists that are not making commercial work? And how do we allow uncomfortable ideas to enter into that ecosystem as well? Because I think, transporting us to the other side of fear assumes that there's fear. What are we afraid of? Right? And why are we afraid of it? And why are these particular things still taboo? What are the I mean, I can't even think of who the real taboo artists are right now that are being supported. Yeah. Like, so where is the space for that? Where is the space for ugly? I guess I would ask that question also.
Do you think that the spirit of downtown still exists? Like experimentation and risk and yeah.
I think it wants to. I think it wants to, and I think it's just getting harder to find where you can do that. So I'm seeing more like house concerts, more scrappy DIY spaces even. But I also think that, this is part of the issue of the way that our culture has sort of shifted is what is the support for wanting to make something that is experimental in the theater context? Like more and more people that I see making weird things are going to TikTok or to YouTube or, things that are more digital video based rather
but
than
short form also.
But short form, exactly. Exactly.
Do you think that there's like a new downtown spirit experimental music thing that you see happening?
It's interesting, right? Because I see I teach at Manus. My students, they still want to experiment. They still are wanting to try things. I'm seeing a lot more people incorporating electronics into their work. I think the thing that I'm not seeing is things that I haven't seen before, right? And that's where I'm not sure what the future is going to be. Like, have we pushed past what we're capable of pushing into? Where else is there to go? I'm waiting to be surprised by that. But I'm also middle-aged now, so maybe it's happening somewhere and I just don't know about it. Like there's that possibility also.
So as you've aged, how do you think about success? Has your definition of success changed or evolved over these years?
I think it really has. I mean, when I was starting out, I was just like, can I even just finish something? Can I finish and put it up and get it done? But it's a condition of being in New York City. Like I have to keep reminding myself of this. It's not normal to know so many MacArthur winners, for one thing. Like what? When growing up in Ramona, California, I definitely did not know anyone who'd won a MacArthur or a Pulitzer or any of these things, and now I'm surrounded by these people. So I have to tell myself, it's okay. You don't have to have a MacArthur. You're still doing fine. I think it is that ever shifting, comparing yourself with the Joneses or whatever it is. Who is your Jones? And choosing your Joneses wisely. And I think. For me now, I'm like, yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm supporting myself. I'm working. I'm still here. Like that's the other thing. I am still here. And I know so many people that I started with that aren't, not just in the sense of they left the arts, but they just, they're not happy. They couldn't handle it. They let themselves get eaten. And I'm like, as long as I don't get eaten by it, then I'm okay.
Yeah. Could you share a moment of pure joy in some piece of your work?
The pure joy is when you have these moments where everyone is sort of coming together and you can feel that you're all on the same wavelength. So like last summer, I was invited to do a sound bath type evening at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And I had two longtime collaborators, friends, my partner, Drew Fleming and Jeff Hudgens. And we had sort of
Bombay
made
Ricky
Bombay
Band
Ricky
members.
Band members, yes. We had made this sort of scaffold for a 90-minute improvisation. And I don't know. It was really lovely just being together and playing for 90 minutes. And it's because the way the evening works is people come and they're lying on blankets, and you start when it's kind of dusk. And by the end, it's totally dark and you cannot see anyone out there. So it was just sort of the three of us playing together and trying to, make just really beautiful sounds together. And I know it was a reminder, like also being together and playing music together, that's really special, and it doesn't always have to be more than that.
And did you play and sing in that particular instance?
We did. We sang in three-part harmony.
And you were playing accordion as well?
I played accordion and then sitar a little bit, and we all played bells. I had an omnichord. It was 90 minutes. We had to do a lot of different things.
Awesome. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to raise?
We're talking about downtown theater, right? And I think, and you're probably seeding this through anyway, but just to say it for myself also, I feel like the downtown, the weird, the risky is always seeding what happens other places. Like I'm thinking of there's a choreographer named Yara Travieso who you've worked with also, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of this piece that she had where she was attached to a parachute and there was a fan blowing the parachute backwards.
Yeah, I
and
saw
later
that
that
piece.
appeared in a Rihanna video, right? So it's like you never know what the mainstream is going to take from the downtown, but I think that there are also just currents of thought that make their way there too. And so without having the weird and the risky and the small, our larger monoculture becomes more boring. And so figuring out ways to support it, I think, is really important.
Thank you so much, Kamala. It's
Thank
always
you.
great to talk to you.
Yes.
Thanks to HowlRound for hosting us, and we hope you'll tune in to more of Torches.